1990s gave us some of the most exciting cars ever built, but hidden among the legends were machines with a darker side. Cars so dangerous, so unpredictable, so badly engineered that they turned the simple act of driving into a deadly gamble. Today, we're counting down the 1990s cars that tried to kill their owners, from misguided experiments to overpowered disasters that put thousands of drivers at risk every single time they turned the key. Number 10. The 1994-98 Mustang Cobra. This was supposed to be Ford's ultimate street warrior, the car that would put Chevrolet's Camaro in its place, and remind the world why the Mustang nameplate mattered. But what buyers got instead was a handling nightmare, wrapped in muscle car nostalgia. The fourth-generation Mustang Cobra looked menacing with its aggressive body kit and dual exhaust rumble. But underneath that intimidating exterior lurked a chassis that simply couldn't handle the power Ford had dumped into it. The 240-horsepower V8 engine was eager and responsive, capable of launching the car from 0 to 60 in just under 6 seconds. But the moment you pushed it into a corner with any real commitment, the Cobra's live rear axle, a suspension design that belonged in the 1960s, not the 90s, would dance and skip like it had a mind of its own. Drivers reported terrifying moments when the back end would suddenly step out mid-corner, even on dry pavement, sending the car into wild oversteer that required lightning-fast reflexes to correct. The problem got worse in the rain, where the Cobra transformed from muscle car into widowmaker. The rear tires would break loose with almost no warning, and once they did, the primitive suspension geometry meant you were along for the ride until physics decided to cooperate again. Insurance companies noticed the pattern quickly. Young drivers buying Cobras and wrapping them around trees, telephone poles, and highway barriers at an alarming rate. The car earned a reputation in emergency rooms across America, and used examples today still carry the scars of their violent past in salvage titles and hastily repaired bodywork. The worst part was how the Cobra could lull you into false confidence on smooth roads, feeling planted and stable until you encountered even a minor surface imperfection mid-corner, at which point the entire rear suspension would unload and send you spinning into whatever happened to be alongside the road. The anti-lock braking system, when equipped, was calibrated so aggressively that it would pulse and chatter even during moderate braking, training drivers to ignore the warning signs until they found themselves in genuine emergency stops where the ABS was desperately trying to prevent a complete loss of control. Number 9. The 1991-96 Chevrolet Caprice. Most people remember the Caprice as a comfortable family cruiser or a reliable police cruiser that dominated law enforcement fleets across the country. But in 1994, Chevrolet offered something truly dangerous, the Impala SS package that turned this gentle giant into an overpowered land yacht with brakes designed for grocery store runs, not aggressive driving. The heart of the problem was simple mathematics. Chevrolet dropped the Corvette's LT one small block V8 into the Caprice, creating 260 horsepower and 330 pound-feet of torque in a car that weighed over 4,300 pounds. That power figure sounds modest by today's standards, but in a vehicle with the aerodynamics of a brick wall and suspension tuning optimized for comfort over control, it created a recipe for disaster. The Impala SS could reach 60 miles per hour in just over 7 seconds, which was genuinely impressive for such a massive sedan. But stopping it required planning, prayer, and a whole lot of open road ahead. The standard four-wheel disc brakes simply weren't sized appropriately for the car's weight and performance potential. Push the Impala SS hard through a series of corners, then try to scrub off speed for a tight turn, and you'd discover just how quickly brake fade could turn confidence into terror. The pedal would sink toward the floor, the stopping distances would extend dramatically, and suddenly you were piloting 2 tons of Detroit iron with the stopping power of a shopping cart. The body roll was equally dramatic. Throw the Impala SS into a quick lane change, and the entire car would lean like a sailing ship in heavy seas, compressing the outside suspension to its limits, while the inside wheels practically lifted off the pavement. Dozens of drivers discovered too late that this gentle-looking sedan could bite hard when pushed beyond its comfort zone. The rear-wheel drive layout meant that power oversteer was always just one aggressive throttle application away, and the long wheelbase that provided highway stability also meant that once the car started rotating, it wanted to keep rotating, swapping ends with surprising enthusiasm for something that looked so dignified and controlled. The 20-inch wheels and low-profile tires that many owners installed to improve the Impala SS's appearance actually made the handling even more treacherous, reducing sidewall flex that had previously provided a small safety margin, and making the car's reactions even more sudden and violent when grip finally broke loose. Number 8. The 1990-97 Mazda Miata. Wait, the beloved Miata? The cheerful little roadster that enthusiasts praise for its perfect balance and approachable handling? Yes, that Miata. Because while the MX-5 was indeed a brilliantly engineered sports car, it also represented one of the most dangerous combinations on American roads. An affordable, lightweight, rear-wheel drive convertible, sold to drivers who had absolutely no business piloting such a machine. The first-generation Miata weighed just over 2,000 pounds and generated a modest 116 horsepower from its tiny 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine. Those numbers suggest a slow, safe little runabout. But the reality was far more sinister. The Miata's short wheelbase, rear-wheel drive layout, and lack of any electronic safety systems created a car that rewarded skill and punished mistakes with equal enthusiasm. In the hands of an experienced driver who understood weight transfer, throttle control, and the physics of oversteer, the Miata was pure joy. But Mazda sold these cars to everyone, including teenagers buying their first sports car, middle-aged buyers reliving their youth, and novice drivers who thought sports car simply meant goes fast in a straight line. The results were predictable and tragic. Lift off the throttle mid-corner in a Miata, and the weight shifts forward, unloading the rear tires and causing sudden dramatic oversteer that catches inexperienced drivers completely off guard. Dozens of Miatas ended up backwards in ditches, wrapped around trees, or rolled over on highway entrance ramps because their owners simply didn't understand the fundamental physics of driving a lightweight rear-drive car at its limits. Add in the fact that the Miata's low seating position and minimal body structure offered almost no protection in serious accidents, and you had a car that looked friendly but could turn deadly in an instant. The soft top provided zero rollover protection, and accidents that would have been minor fender benders in heavier cars could prove fatal in the featherweight Mazda. The short wheelbase that made the Miata so nimble and responsive also made it twitchy and nervous on the highway, especially in crosswinds or when passing large trucks that would buffet the little roadster with their slipstream, pushing it across lanes and requiring constant steering corrections to maintain a straight path. The combination of rear-wheel drive and an open differential meant that if one rear wheel hit a patch of gravel or wet leaves while accelerating, all the power would transfer to that spinning wheel, while the wheel with grip did nothing, creating sudden and unpredictable handling characteristics that novice drivers couldn't anticipate or manage effectively. Number 7. The 1995 Ford Mustang GT. The mid-90s Mustang GT suffered from an identity crisis that put lives at risk. Ford wanted to sell a modern muscle car that could compete with the Camaro and Firebird, but they built it on a platform that traced its roots back to the 1970s Fox body chassis, a design never meant to handle the power and performance expectations of 90s buyers. The 215 horsepower 5.0-liter V8 seemed conservative on paper, especially compared to the more powerful Cobra variant. But that power was more than enough to overwhelm the GT's antiquated rear suspension and inadequate brakes. The real danger came from Ford's marketing, which sold the Mustang GT as an everyday performance car that anyone could drive hard and enjoy safely. That message resonated with buyers who had dreamed of owning a Mustang since childhood, but who lacked the skills to manage a poorly balanced rear-drive coupe with limited grip and even more limited forgiveness. The GT's tendency to snap into oversteer under liftoff or during aggressive cornering caught hundreds of drivers by surprise. One moment, you'd be accelerating through a gentle curve, feeling confident and in control. The next moment, the rear end would step out, the tires would break loose, and you'd be fighting the wheel just to keep the car pointed in roughly the right direction. The brakes added another layer of danger, adequate for normal driving, but prone to fade under repeated hard stops or when descending mountain roads. Enthusiast forums from the era are filled with stories of GT owners who discovered their brakes had turned to mush halfway down a steep grade, leaving them pumping a spongy pedal and praying they could scrub off enough speed before the next sharp turn. The manual transmission, while robust and satisfying when driven properly, had a vague shifter that made it easy to miss gears during aggressive driving, and the clutch was either fully engaged or fully disengaged, with very little progressive feel in between, making smooth launches difficult and wheel-hopping burnouts almost inevitable when trying to accelerate hard from a standing start. The fuel system on the GT was also prone to vapor lock in hot weather, causing the engine to stumble or die completely at the worst possible moments, like when merging into fast-moving highway traffic or climbing steep grades in summer heat. The McPherson strut front suspension, while simple and cost-effective to manufacture, provided poor camber control during hard cornering, causing the outside front tire to roll onto its sidewall and dramatically reducing grip just when you needed it most, leading to understeer that would push the car wide in corners and forcing drivers to either lift off the throttle, which could induce snap oversteer, or plow straight ahead into whatever obstacle happened to be on the outside of the turn. Number 6, the 1991-96 Dodge Stealth RT Twin Turbo. Mitsubishi and Dodge collaborated to create what should have been a world-beating sports car, a twin turbocharged, all-wheel drive rocket that could challenge the best from Japan and Europe. What they actually delivered was a maintenance nightmare, so complex and unreliable that it spent more time trying to kill its owners through mechanical failures than through any inherent handling vices. The Stealth RT Twin turbo-packed 300 horsepower from its 3-liter V6, routed through an advanced all-wheel drive system that could vector power between the front and rear axles on paper. It was a technological showcase. In reality, it was a ticking time bomb of failing sensors, leaking turbos, and electrical gremlins that could transform a routine drive into a life-threatening emergency without warning. The most terrifying failures involved the turbocharger system, which relied on a complex network of vacuum lines, solenoids, and control modules to manage boost pressure. When these components failed, and they failed often, the results ranged from annoying to catastrophic. Some owners experienced sudden boost spikes that would slam the car forward with no warning, while others dealt with complete power loss in the middle of highway merges or passing maneuvers. The all-wheel drive system presented its own hazards. When working correctly, it provided exceptional traction and stability. But when the transfer case or rear differential started failing, the car could suddenly shift into unexpected handling modes, sending power to the wrong wheels at the wrong time and causing unpredictable behavior that even experienced drivers struggled to manage. The complex electronics meant that warning lights would illuminate for phantom problems, training owners to ignore the dashboard until a real crisis developed. Mechanics dreaded working on these cars, and owners learned to fear every drive, never knowing if today would be the day something critical decided to fail at 70 miles per hour. The active aerodynamic system featured a rear spoiler that would deploy at speed to increase downforce, but the mechanism was prone to failure, sometimes deploying asymmetrically or at random speeds, creating sudden handling changes that could startle drivers into making dangerous corrections. The four-wheel steering system, which was supposed to enhance agility at low speeds and stability at high speeds, could fail in ways that made the car dart unpredictably or resist steering inputs. And when it malfunctioned, the repair bills often exceeded the car's entire value, leaving owners with an undrivable sports car that wasn't worth fixing. The transversely mounted V6 engine configuration made even routine maintenance, like spark plug changes, a nightmare that required removing half the engine bay components, leading many owners to defer maintenance until catastrophic failures occurred, often at the worst possible moments when the car was being driven aggressively on unfamiliar roads far from home. Number 5. The 1990-95 Chevrolet Corvette ZR-1. This was Chevrolet's ultimate weapon, a hand-built supercar that could embarrass Ferraris and Porsches for a fraction of their price. The ZR-1 featured an exotic aluminum 32-valve V8 designed by Lotus, producing 375 horsepower and capable of pushing the car past 180 miles per hour. It was America's first true modern supercar, and it was also a handling nightmare that demanded absolute perfection from its drivers. The problem started with the tires. The ZR-1 rolled on massive Goodyear Eagle ZR-40s, specially developed just for this car. When warm and gripped to dry pavement, they provided astonishing cornering ability, but in cold weather, wet conditions, or during the first few miles of driving before they reached operating temperature, those same tires offered about as much grip as plastic rollers. Drivers who didn't understand this learned expensive lessons. Accelerate aggressively before the tires were warm, and the ZR-1 would light up both rear tires and swap ends before you could lift off the throttle. Hit a patch of rain mid-corner, and the carefully balanced chassis would transition instantly from neutral handling to wild oversteer, requiring expert car control just to avoid the nearest solid object. The ZR-1's power delivery made everything worse. The engine built power smoothly and relentlessly, which sounds ideal until you're already at the limit of adhesion, and the car just keeps accelerating harder. Lift off too quickly and you'd induce snap oversteer. Stay in the throttle and you'd overwhelm the tires and spin anyway. The narrow margin between perfect control and complete loss of grip meant the ZR-1 required constant attention and precise inputs. Insurance companies treated the ZR-1 like the exotic supercar it was, meaning coverage was expensive when you could get it at all, and claims were processed with the assumption that owner error was always involved. The secondary throttle butterflies that gave the LT5 engine its dual personality character could stick open, creating sudden power surges that would break the rear tires loose without warning. And the engine's complexity meant that routine maintenance required specialized knowledge and tools that most mechanics simply didn't possess, leading to improper repairs that could result in catastrophic engine failure at highway speeds. The ZR-1's width and low seating position created significant blind spots, making lane changes dangerous, and the powerful brakes, while capable in expert hands, had an extremely aggressive initial bite that could lock the rear wheels if you weren't smooth and progressive with pedal pressure, sending the car into a spin just when you were trying to slow down for a corner. The limited slip differential, tuned for maximum performance, would sometimes lock unexpectedly during trail braking into corners, causing the rear end to suddenly pivot and rotate in ways that differed dramatically from the standard Corvette's more forgiving behavior, catching even experienced Corvette drivers off guard when they stepped up to the ZR-1 and discovered that their hard-won skills didn't fully transfer to this much more aggressive machine. Number 4. The 1992-96 Dodge Viper RT/10. If the ZR-1 was dangerous, the original Dodge Viper was homicidal. This wasn't a car with handling problems or brake issues that could be managed with skill and caution. This was a barely civilized race car, with a thin veneer of street legality, sold to the public with almost no safety equipment and absolutely no forgiveness for mistakes. The numbers tell part of the story. 400 horsepower from an 8-liter V10 engine, rear-wheel drive, no traction control, no anti-lock brakes, no stability control, and no airbags. The Viper weighed just over 3,300 pounds, giving it a power-to-weight ratio that would embarrass most supercars of the era. But the real danger wasn't the power. It was the complete absence of electronic aids, combined with a chassis setup so aggressive that even professional drivers treated the Viper with cautious respect. The steering offered no power assistance, requiring genuine muscle to maneuver at low speeds, but becoming dangerously quick and sensitive at highway velocities. The throttle response was immediate and violent, with no electronic buffer between your right foot and 400 horsepower worth of American V10 Fury step on the gas. With any real commitment, and the rear tires would vaporize, sending the car sideways in a cloud of tire smoke and burnt rubber. The manual transmission required careful rev matching and deliberate shifts, because miss a gear or dump the clutch carelessly, and you'd either money shift the engine into expensive destruction or shock load the drivetrain hard enough to break something important. In the wet, the Viper transformed from dangerous to suicidal. The wide rear tires, aggressive suspension geometry and complete lack of electronic intervention meant that any standing water or slick surface could send the car into a spin that developed faster than human reflexes could counter. Dodge knew exactly what they were selling. The owner's manual included warnings about the Viper's extreme performance and the need for above-average driving skills. But warnings don't stop enthusiastic buyers, and Vipers quickly earned a reputation as widowmakers that killed or injured dozens of owners who thought they could handle a car that professional racers approached with caution. The side exhaust pipes ran along the door sills and became hot enough to cause severe burns if you brushed against them getting in or out of the car. A seemingly minor design flaw that nonetheless sent numerous Viper owners to emergency rooms with serious thermal injuries. The soft top was nearly impossible to install properly by yourself, meaning most owners drove with it off, leaving them completely exposed to the elements and offering zero protection in rollover accidents, which were disturbingly common given the Viper's short wheelbase and tendency to rotate suddenly when pushed past its already high limits. The pedal spacing and clutch effort meant that heel-toe downshifting required genuine athletic ability, and the lack of any sound deadening meant the V10's roar would leave drivers partially deaf after extended drives, potentially missing important audio cues like tire squeal or grinding mechanical components that signaled impending failure. The massive torque output meant that even in higher gears, a sudden stab of the throttle could break the rear tires loose at highway speeds. And the primitive suspension damping meant the car would continue to oscillate and bounce after hitting bumps, creating unpredictable handling characteristics that changed from moment to moment, depending on what the road surface was doing to the suspension geometry. Number 3, the 1990 to 97 Geo Metro. The Metro weighed less than 1,700 pounds and generated just 55 horsepower from its tiny 1-liter 3-cylinder engine. It was designed as cheap, efficient transportation for city driving and short commutes. But Americans bought these cars and drove them on highways and interstates, where they were catastrophically outmatched by every other vehicle on the road. The Metro's lightweight meant that crosswinds would push it across lanes, semi-trucks would create terrifying buffeting as they passed, and any accident, even a minor fender bender, could crumple the car's minimal body structure and injure occupants severely. The tiny engine couldn't maintain highway speeds on even modest inclines, forcing Metro drivers to plant the throttle to the floor just to keep up with traffic, creating dangerous situations where the car simply couldn't accelerate out of danger or merge safely. The brakes were sized appropriately for the car's weight, but they couldn't provide the stopping power needed for emergency situations, especially when loaded with passengers or climbing down mountain grades. The steering was light and vague, providing almost no feedback and requiring constant correction to maintain a straight line. But the real killer was crashworthiness. The Metro's small size and light construction offered virtually no protection in serious accidents. When a Metro collided with a full-size pickup truck or SUV, vehicles that dominated American roads in the 90s, the Metro's occupants absorbed the full force of the impact with minimal crumple zones or safety structure between them and the other vehicle. Fatality rates in Metro accidents were shockingly high, not because the car had inherent handling problems, but because it simply wasn't substantial enough to protect its occupants in the real-world traffic conditions, where Americans drove it every day. The 3-cylinder engine vibrated so severely at certain engine speeds that it could loosen bolts and fasteners throughout the car, leading to mechanical failures that stranded drivers in dangerous locations or caused components to fail while driving. The manual transmission's cables would stretch and snap without warning, leaving drivers stuck in whatever gear they happened to be in when the cable broke, unable to shift or disengage the clutch. The electrical system was so marginal that running the headlights, heater, and rear defroster simultaneously could drain the battery faster than the alternator could recharge it, leaving drivers stranded with a dead battery in the middle of winter storms, when they needed those systems most desperately for survival and visibility. The 13-inch wheels and narrow tires provided minimal contact patch with the road, meaning that emergency maneuvers or sudden stops on wet pavement would send the Metro sliding helplessly, with the driver as a passenger rather than someone in control of the vehicle's destiny. Number 2, the 1993 Ford Mustang S VT Cobra R. Ford built just 107 examples of the 1993 Cobra R, creating what should have been a collector's item and track day weapon. Instead, they created a street-legal race car so focused on performance that it sacrificed every comfort, safety feature, and concession to normal driving, then sold it to customers, who promptly discovered that race car for the street meant dangerous on the street. The Cobra R deleted the air conditioning, radio, rear seat, and sound deadening to save weight. It gained stiffer springs, recalibrated dampers, larger anti-roll bars, and more aggressive alignment settings designed for track use. The result was a Mustang that weighed just over 3,000 pounds and generated 235 horsepower. Not overwhelming numbers, but in a chassis, this focused and uncompromising. Those numbers told only part of the story. The Cobra R was set up to rotate, to point its nose into corners aggressively, and reward throttle steer techniques that would get you killed on public roads. The rock-hard suspension crashed over every imperfection, upsetting the chassis and causing the rear end to skip and hop over bumps that normal cars absorbed without drama. The sticky Goodyear tires provided enormous grip on smooth surfaces, but could suddenly let go when crossing painted lines, manhole covers, or expansion joints. Ford intended the Cobra R for weekend track warriors, who would trailer it to the circuit, run hard, then load it up and drive something sensible the rest of the week. Instead, buyers drove them daily, pushed them hard on unfamiliar roads, and discovered that track-focused suspension settings and street driving were a dangerous combination. The limited production numbers meant most buyers were collectors or enthusiasts who saw the Cobra R as an investment or toy. But enough ended up in the hands of drivers who simply wanted the fastest Mustang that accident rates were concerning. The car demanded smooth inputs, precise throttle control, and an understanding of weight transfer that most buyers simply didn't possess. The aggressive camber settings that helped the Cobra R corner flat on smooth racetracks meant that on crowned public roads, the car would follow every surface irregularity and track in grooves and ruts, requiring constant steering corrections and making straight-line stability a genuine challenge. The lack of sound deadening meant that mechanical noises that would normally be muffled became alarmingly loud, causing drivers to think their car was failing catastrophically, when in reality it was just the normal sounds of a race-bred machine, leading to distracted driving and panic reactions that created dangerous situations. The racing bucket seats held you firmly in place during track driving, but were so uncomfortable for daily use that drivers would arrive at their destinations fatigued and sore, reducing alertness and reaction time for the drive home. Number 1. The 1991 to 96 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. The fourth-generation Camaro Z28 takes our top spot, not because it was poorly engineered, but because it combined genuinely impressive performance with a chassis that could betray even experienced drivers, then wrapped that dangerous combination in an affordable package that put it within reach of young, inexperienced buyers with more courage than skill. The LT1 small block V8 produced 275 horsepower and 325 pound-feet of torque, enough to push the 3,400-pound coupe from 0 to 60 in just over 5 seconds. That performance impressed in magazine tests and thrilled buyers test driving on dealer lots, but Chevrolet mounted that power on a solid rear axle with marginal damping and questionable geometry, creating a car that could transition from balanced and predictable to violently out of control in the space of a single corner. The Z28's weight distribution put 52% of the mass over the front wheels, meaning the rear end was always light and ready to step out if the driver lifted throttle mid-corner or hit a bump while accelerating. The T-tops that most buyers ordered further reduced chassis stiffness, allowing the body to flex and twist in ways that upset the already marginal suspension. The result was a car that felt stable and planted right up until it didn't, transitioning so quickly from grip to slide that even alert drivers often couldn't catch the spin before the car was backwards or sideways into a barrier. The brakes were adequate for street use but faded quickly under aggressive driving, and the lack of ABS on early models meant that panic stops could lock the wheels and eliminate steering control just when you needed it most. The aggressive styling attracted younger buyers, who saw the Camaro as a statement of power and freedom. Insurance companies saw it differently, as a high-powered rear-drive coupe with known handling vices, frequently driven by inexperienced owners who who lacked the skills to manage sudden oversteer or brake fade. Premiums reflected that risk, and accident rates proved the insurers right. The Camaro Z28 earned its deadly reputation, one crashed car at a time, built by drivers who discovered too late that affordable muscle and safe handling don't always come together in the same package. The OptiSpark ignition distributor, mounted low in the engine bay where it could be soaked by water from puddles or rain, would fail without warning, causing the engine to die instantly, desperately trying to reach the shoulder before being rear-ended by vehicles that couldn't stop in time. The plastic coolant elbows in the LT1 engine would crack and fail, causing sudden coolant loss and engine overheating that could seize the motor solid at highway speeds, locking the rear wheels through the transmission and sending the car into an uncontrollable spin. The poor outward visibility, caused by the low roofline, thick pillars, and high beltline, created massive blind spots that made lane changes and parking maneuvers genuinely dangerous. And the long hood made it impossible to see where the front of the car ended, leading to countless parking lot accidents and front-end collisions. The rear hatch design allowed water to pool in areas that would rust through the structure, weakening the chassis and, in extreme cases, causing catastrophic structural failure during accidents that the car should have survived. The rack and pinion steering, while more modern than the Mustang's recirculating ball setup, had a dead spot on center that required constant micro-corrections at highway speeds, fatiguing drivers and reducing their ability to react quickly in emergency situations. The electronic traction control system that appeared on later models was so intrusive and poorly calibrated that it would cut power at inappropriate times, sometimes mid-corner, when you needed acceleration to balance the car, causing sudden weight transfers that could actually induce the very spins the system was designed to prevent, leading many owners to simply disable the system entirely and drive without any electronic safety net whatsoever. The 1990s promised us freedom, power, and the open road, but hidden in that promise were cars that demanded respect, skill, and constant vigilance, and punished the slightest mistake with consequences that ranged from expensive to fatal. Which of these deadly machines would you brave for one last ride? Share your answer in the comments, and if you love stories from the wild side of automotive history, hit subscribe for more tales from the era when cars still had teeth.